This episode is scripted by Mateus Ramos, Ronny M. Worsey, Andrew Stevens, Leea Mäkelä and Newell Fisher, and is narrated, recorded and edited by Newell Fisher. Hello, and welcome to the Watership Down podcast episode 69, in which we will be looking at the subject of religion, folklore and seership in Watership Down. My apologies for the delay in the release of this episode. Life got in the way again. This is an episode I've intended to make for some time now, and I wanted to include as many contributions from the listeners to the podcast as possible. Having reached a natural break in the story in the 1978 film, namely the equivalent of the end of part 1 of the book, this seems a good time to look at another subject and hear what listeners to the podcast have to say. This episode is in more of a magazine style, with the contributions having no special through narrative, just a collection of thoughts around a particular subject in relation to Watership Down, though I have tried to place the contributions in a kind of themed order. The Rabbit Religion. What kind of religion do the rabbits of Watership Down have? Mateus Ramos wrote in one of the Watership Down fans groups on Facebook on 11/4/22 when I first proposed this episode, quote, "The rabbit's religion draws from many sources. Some things look like ancient myths, like the sun is the major god as in the Egyptian mythology and others. Also, El-Ahrairah is both a god and a hero, like the demigods from Greek mythology, such as Hercules, Perseus and Theseus, but also other heroes from other mythologies and religions, like Gilgamesh, Moses and even Jesus. El-Ahrairah, on the other hand, is a different breed in the way that he is the main hero, but is also a trickster, when those are usually second characters like Loki from Norse mythology. More things taken from the ancients. A storyteller or bard who guards the legends and passes them always in unwritten form. A story of the hero going to meet death, El-Ahrairah going to meet the Black Rabbit of Inlay, like Hercules, Orpheus, but also kind of like Jesus meeting Satan in the desert and being unsuccessfully tempted. And also taken from Christianity and Judaism, an original sin, where El-Ahrairah insists on keeping breeding, and the subsequent punishment, which also reminds us that he was an Adam figure, an original being, the hero sacrificing for his people when the Black Rabbit of Inlay tears his body, like Jesus. A common thing in many creeds is an event where the god or some god makes an event to kill and cleanse many individuals, usually represented as a flood. In Watership Down, it can be interpreted as when Frith made the Elil more powerful to diminish the rabbit population, but that is more of a long shot. So, long story short, at the same time Frith is Rah the Sun-God, Zeus, Helios, Odin, Alah, Jehovah and God. El-Ahrairah is at the same time Gilgamesh, Hercules, Moses, Noah, Loki, Jesus and Adam. And the Black Rabbit of Inlay is Thanatos, Hades, Satan and the Angel of Death." End quote. Andrew Stevens, who you may remember scripted episode 57 on Watership Down and the Classics, wrote on 19/6/22, quote, "In El-Ahrairah and the Black Rabbit of Inlay, Adams draws on the Judeo-Christian tradition and pagan myths of suffering, maiming, sacrifice and rebirth of heroes, messiahs and gods, again starting with archetypes but quickly building on them. With his rabbits losing a long-running siege waged by King Darzin, El-Ahrairah journeys to the warren of the Black Rabbit of Inlay and offers his life for his people's salvation, but learns that the Black Rabbit makes no such bargains. It is made clear to the prince that he can leave at any time, but he chooses to stay and endures terrible suffering whilst trying to save his people. His maiming is among the novel's most upsetting events, yet proves his courage. In his final attempt to become a plague-bearing weapon at the cost of his own life, he has done everything he can, even though he has failed. This finally moves the Black Rabbit to action, and it is difficult to believe that El-Ahrairah has simply annoyed him into saving the rabbits. Frith's reward of physical restoration, albeit with a little metaphorical bell around his neck, suggests that the god approved of his sacrifice, and perhaps even admires his trickster prince's selflessness. Something still known now when a rabbit risks its own life to stamp and warn of danger. When Dandelion explains the nature of the Black Rabbit to his audience, it is easy to interpret the first view of him as a sort of rabbit devil, but the storyteller's own understanding of him as a servant of Frith is more convincing. Rather than a Judeo-Christian hell, his warren is more like Hades, a necessary place, performing a role in the world with a steward, ultimately answering to a higher power. He is certainly not Milton's charismatic Satan, nor the seductive figure of many fictional versions of Lucifer, though when Bigwig mistakes Holly for the Black Rabbit and mutters "you have to go when he calls you" in Fear in the Dark, there is a sense that if he chooses to, he can effortlessly impose his will on any rabbit. However, although the Black Rabbit of Inlay is undoubtedly an agent of Frith carrying out his duties, there is something compelling about him and his domain. The image of King Darzin's soldiers in, quote, confusion and terror in the falling darkness at huge rabbits with red eyes stalking among the thistles, end quote, is both frightening and thrilling. A dark divine intervention rewarding a brave prince willing to die for his people, end quote. Ronny M. Worsey wrote in one of the Watership Down fans' Facebook groups on 11/4/22, quote, Cowslip's Warren represents to me a closed community completely obsessed by religion. A cult, basically. You can't leave, you can't ask certain questions, pictures on the wall are worshipped and everything is ritualised, even saying hello. There's also a patronising attitude to outsiders. Cowslips Warren feel they are superior to the unenlightened rabbits. With this obsession in religion comes an abandonment of the things rabbits normally rely on for survival, instinct and trickery. Normal rabbit folklore and traditions have been dropped, because what's the point in telling stories about a cunning hero and his adventures when such things are seen as quaint and old-fashioned? Cowslips Warren cling to the belief that there is no free will, that the wires will take them one day, and that everyone just accepts this and never talks about it. It's the ultimate in denial. It's a cult of nihilism, raising their kits to believe that there is no point in getting too attached to anyone or anything because they are the chosen ones who will feast, dance and look down on everyone else until their god, the wires, takes them. End quote. My thoughts on this subject are that Adam's rabbit religion definitely draws heavily on the Western religions of a book. In The Escape from the Marshes of Kelphazin, there is an element of Exodus and Moses leading his people to freedom. In The Caverns of the Warren of the Inlay, there is a certain Christ-like quality to the often more flippant El-Ahrairah, and there are elements of the warrior prophets of Islam and Sikhism in his willingness to fight the enemies of his people where needed. But looking further east, there are hints of a polytheism in the forms of the demigods Prince Rainbow and the Black Rabbit, both of whom serve the will of the supreme god Frith. Lastly, a key difference between the book and the 1978 film is that we do not actually hear the voice of Frith in the main narrative in the book, unless the "Your storms, Leea, use it" of the chapter The Thunder Breaks counts. However, in the film, the line the Black Rabbit delivers to El-Ahrairah about the nature of death and sacrifice in the story told by Dandelion near Ephrata is transplanted to the scene where Hazel runs to Nuthanger Farm to save his warren during the battle with Ephrata on Watership Down. Hazel offers his life for his people, and we hear directly the voice of Frith respond. So, one way or another, it appears that in the book Watership Down, a story in which, as I have previously said, the supernatural definitely exists, it appears that it is rabbits who have correctly worked out the nature of the supernatural. And why not? Rabbit folklore. The folklore of rabbits is a running theme throughout the original book, and in the 1996 sequel, Tales from Watership Down, it is the dominant theme. Leea Mäkelä from Finland, who has provided extensive commentary on tales that will be featured when we go through it, sent me the following on 11/5/22. Quote, The stories of El-Ahrairah in the world of Prince Rainbow and King Darzin seem indeed to be part of the same continuum, like it had been another larger rabbit story going on in a different world than the Sandalford Watership rabbits, but intertwined with it. The tale of Rowsby Woof, indeed, is clearly a standalone story, much like many of the stories in Tales. It also seems to be a story of a specific folklore genre, namely Tales of a Stupid Ogre. Rowsby Woof being more ogreish in nature than, for example, King Darzin, who is left a bit ambiguous so that you can read stories about him thinking he's either human or animal, but it's never said which animal he is. Apparently a city-building vegetarian animal who practices agriculture and whose children are about the same size as grown-up rabbits. However, I think even if the tale of Rowsby Woof stands out, it has probably its reasons to be in the place it is in the book. It's told in the moment of peace before the final battle, when rabbits have settled down and have started to live their domestic life. They're telling also a story set in a more domestic setting than the earlier stories, where El-Ahrairah travels from one kingdom to another. I guess that also that the rabbit lifespan being shorter than those of humans might play a role in man-made gardens and hoodoos having existed in the mythical realm and since the dawn of time, even if for us they are newer inventions. Also, I'm thinking whether the story of poor faithful Rowsby Wolf serving man who's leaving him without food and to freeze outside in the night, and then getting even tricked by El-Ahrairah in his willingness to serve, can be read also as some sort of commentary on Campion staying so faithful to Ephrathah and following orders, even if they cause harm to him and other rabbits. Even if Campion is in no way ogreish, and definitely not a stupid ogre in his nature, but somehow him following orders for the Watership Warren's demise made me think of Rowsby Wolf running around the house, thinking he's saving someone by doing so. I've been thinking whether some of the short stories in Tales existed already at the time or before Watership Down was written, even if some or most of them were written afterwards. My theory is that there had been a continuum, the ones with Prince Rainbow and King Darzin, that was composed and written around the same time with each other, and then standalone stories were written in different times, some maybe around the same time, some later. No idea though. Am I anywhere close to how it must actually have been? I wonder if the topic has ever been touched in by some interview or not. Haven't seen many, if any, interviews of Richard Adams, but I guess there must be some anyway. Talking about folklore, near the end of Watership Down, Hazel overhears another rabbit telling their story, having changed names so that Hazel has become El-Ahrairah and Fiver Rabscuttle, and having embellished some other elements with wondrous details and telling some parts in different order than they might have happened, basically showing the reader how stories were born when they were told by others than those who were telling of her first-hand experience. From previous readings, I remembered mostly that the part was there, the story of our heroes having started to turn into a myth, but I didn't remember who was telling it, and misremembered that Rabscuttle would have been Bigwig, so now had my memory refreshed in this rereading. El-Ahrairah seems to be the dominant character of rabbit folklore, attracting also motifs of stories that were originally stories of other rabbits. So who knows if the tale of Rowsby Wolf was something that happened to a now unnamed rabbit from Sandalford's Owls some generations ago, but is now retold and embellished as something that happened to El-Ahrairah and Rabscuttle." End quote. Leea continued on 22.6.22, quote, "On a more positive note about religion in Watership Down, it seems Richard Adams really did pay attention to build a world with living mythology and religion, to the point the rabbits use colourful swear words related to their religion, besides drawing inspirations to their daily life from their mythical stories, and turning their own adventures into mythical stories over the course of time. Some have criticised, for example, Tolkien's world as oddly devoid of religion, since it doesn't seem to have living meaning in the characters' lives. While I think some of Tolkien's characters apparently do draw inspiration from the stories of their predecessors and have holy items related to them, I agree they don't curse or use any taboo names in context that could be read as them practising religion. Of course, it could be read as part of such a speak of the devil and the devil will come word magic that Tolkien's characters avoid speaking of the evil in their world because it's always so near. But it's still interpreting a noticeable lack of something. Which brings me to notice that actually even Adam's rabbits might be avoiding mentioning the devil by name, even if they use words describing the devil as part of their swear words, since apparently embleer, referring to the smell of a fox, is a particular insult, but the word for the fox isn't used nearly as much. It seems to me that especially in the first part of Tales from Watership Down, the stories are written to formulas that have been inspired by some theories on folklore. In Watership Down, the mythological stories of El-Ahrairah were more literary, but their influence on the life of characters and how the life of the characters turned in the stories seems to have taken inspiration from folklore and theories of it." End quote. Some interesting thoughts on this complex subject, and certainly one we will return to extensively when we look at Tales from Watership Down. Rabbit Seership. We now move on to the subject of seership in Watership Down, a theme that was much developed in both the 1999 TV series, particularly in Series 3 as I recall, as well as in the role-playing game Bunnies and Burrows. On 22.6.22, Leea continued, quote, "There was that academic quote about shamanism as the starting quote of Fiver Beyond. I tend to forget that it's there and just paid more attention to why it's there on this reading time. Now I guess reading the translation plays a role. Fiver Beyond is translated as something I've read as Fiver Upset or Fiver Off His Track, even if the original title includes also possible reading of Fiver reaching to the underworld, and so very much on his track rather than off. Maybe that is actually the first time Fiver uses his ability to travel between the worlds intentionally. Maybe he is using it intentionally for the first time under the attack of the Ephrathans, but even if he's fallen into a trance and found a way to the other world more accidentally, this might be the turning point he realises he can travel there and actively seek for information rather than just try to grab pieces of information in passing visions. I guess that might be a classical reference as well, with the stories of heroes going to fetch their loved ones from the underworld. Fiver is trying to reach Hazel in the other world, and because he cannot be found there, he must still be alive. In the beginning of Watership Down, Fiver is the weird kid, smaller than others and lacking in social skills, so that he needs Hazel as a mediator between him and others. He has extraordinary skill that comes and goes in a way he can't control, much like he doesn't have control over most other things in his life in Sandalford. He has visions that turn out to be true, but he has trouble communicating what they actually are and how they would or should influence their actions. Part of Fiver's timidness apparently comes from being constantly bullied, and once they leave Sandalford he gets more room to become himself, learn more about the skill that is his essence, how it works and how it can be used. Well, I guess the same applies to all who felt Sandalford was limiting their potential, but it is especially striking with Fiver, who is a wreck when they leave and becomes calmer as the story goes on, and also gets appreciated because of his special skills that had been considered nonsense in Sandalford. The Warren of the Snares is some kind of turning point in how others don't see what Fiver sees, and how he needs to learn to communicate in ways that also others understand. But after that he has also learned to control his skills besides communicating them, with those other turning points in Fiver Beyond and the battle against the Ephrathans, when he's learning the shaman technique of travelling in spirit to the other world and reaching there information that will be of use in the physical world as well. In Tales from Watership Down, he is already presented as a religious specialist of his community, who is able to explain the nature of otherworldly phenomena to others and comfort them in their troubles. Fiver generally is so important a character of the group of rabbits in Watership Down that it has influenced some interpretations. In the game Bunnies and Burrows, Seer is one of the character classes, and in the 1999 series there seemed to be a bit of an interpretation of seer or shaman as such a profession that is needed in rabbit warrens, so that Silverweed was shaman of Cowslip's warren, and precious enough to be used as a trading item between them and El-Ahrairah. Or was it between them and Dark Haven at that point? I think I did see some tendency to form groups around Bunnies and Burrows' professions or classes in that series, and write episodes as quests those groups could go on and interact. Or then it could be I was more likely to see it that way because I was watching the whole of the series around the same time I was trying to come to terms with the Bunnies and Burrows rulebook. Interestingly enough, at least in the third edition of Bunnies and Burrows that I have, seers and empaths have their role in the warrens, but there is no such structure as El-Ahrairah. It seems it might be Silverweed who sets the process moving in Fiver to come to better terms with his own special skills and learning to use them, because Fiver later mentions Silverweed was sure which side of this world and other world he belonged to. So it could also be shamans aren't just that common with our rabbits after all, and in Sandalford they were not appreciated at all. So Silverweed was the first other rabbit Fiver met who had the ability to communicate with the other world, even if Fiver noted later Silverweed was misusing his abilities in serving lies. I guess it's notable at this point that in some shamanistic cultures a shaman's ability to move between worlds is called shaman's disease, and that the shaman doesn't choose his or her career, but the career chooses him or her. I think that might apply to some extent even to Watership Down. Slightly related is the topic of whether Bigwig has first-hand experience of intuition or even supernatural experiences, and therefore is more open to Fiver's and Heisenthlay's experiences, even if he seems very straightforward and down-to-earth, even black and white sometimes. In Tales from Watership Down there seems to be one more case of him being more intuitive than he seems when he recognises Fly-Earth right away. If skills with the supernatural were not valued in Sandalford, Bigwig has probably been developing other skills that were valued higher, and so he has skill that comes and goes because he doesn't really know how to use it, or maybe not even skill, rather a tendency he could also hide. For Fiver, just that skill was the strongest and defining one, already when he didn't know how to use it, so it was something that Fiver couldn't have hidden under other traits." End quote. Thank you, Leea. A wide-ranging and interesting perspective taking in the full variety of the wider Watership Down universe. I'm sure we will mention Bunnies and Burrows again. I very nearly played the game in 1989 during a brief interest in role-playing games, and I've always regretted not doing so. Many thanks to all the contributors to this listener-scripted episode, Mateus, Ronny, Andrew and Leea. This has been fascinating to edit together, and we should definitely do this again. Next time we return to the 1978 film, as Hazel and Pipkin visit a farm near Watership Down. What will they find?